Yeah, so we understand what's going on at the ground level, and the tough thing is like our government doesn't have the systems in place to really try and get to the ground level.
Yep.
We set up the PPP, which you said fell short of its goals for a number of reasons.
Yeah. So to go through that, PPP in conception was great, right? Payroll protection, it was just 1 inch word, says exactly what it means. If we would have gotten enough money into the hands of small to medium sized businesses quickly enough, they would have been able to retain people on their payroll. That would have prevented those people from going on unemployment, which would have prevented them from getting that $600 extra stimulus. But once we didn't get that money into businesses' hands quickly enough, they did go on to unemployment. And not only did that create a set of disincentives because you had 68% of people making more on unemployment than they did in their previous job, and that made it, them not wanting to go back to work. But that delay also turned companies into zombie companies, where you didn't know quite when you were going to get the PPP money. You weren't sure when you were going to be able to open or how much you were going to be able to be open. You didn't know what the sales or demand was going to be for your product or service if and when you were open, and you couldn't bring back your employees because they're going to be continuing to get their unemployment until July 31st. So a lot of companies are in this nowhere land that we're finding ourselves in right now. And so rather than recognizing this is the problem, we're trying to just pretend it's not a problem.
Yes.
And look, and I don't want to make it seem like any one party's to blame. Everybody's to blame. The Democrats delayed things. They wanted all these different fundings inside of it, and that delayed things a little bit. The Republicans, the way they process it through the Treasury Department, made it so difficult for banks that, that slowed things down and made them act like banks instead of acting like they needed to solve a problem. And so nobody right now is just recognizing we've got, 3.7 million companies, whatever the number is, that receive PPP at some level, who are zombie companies in a lot of respects. And we've got to address their problems. And most importantly, we've got to address the demand issue. Because until there's demand for products and services, businesses aren't going to be able to stay open no matter how much money you give them.
Now, and I love the idea you proposed to try and get money back into the market, which is you said, look, we should give everyone $1,000 every 2 weeks, use it or lose it. It like disappears if you don't spend it within 14 days. And I got to say, that would be one way to get us to spend all that money. But I'd love the idea, because it would force us to actually not save. Because right now, I think you were the one who pointed out we're saving more money than we ever have.
It's 14.4% savings rate, and increasing, the most it's been in more than 40 years. And so if everybody's saving money, then nobody's spending it. And, this all comes down to confidence, Andrew. And, people aren't going to spend money unless they're confident that they're going to be able to either get a job or keep a job. There's just so much uncertainty. And we're past the point now of just giving people the money. We've got to get to a point now where we've got to have people spending money and get that multiplier effect. And what I suggested was that we did it a little bit to do it a little bit different than the stimulus checks, the $1,200 that we give, because people saved a lot of that where they could. But the one place that we missed in that $1,200, college kids.
They weren't eligible for that for the most part. Yeah.
Who spends all their money? College kids, right? Because they have everything they've got to spend. I mean, and they're not savers. And so what I proposed was starting with college kids and effectively the same eligibility otherwise for the $1,200, you would get a debit card. And having a debit card goes to your point. We have no way to give funding to people right now. We saw what happened with the $1,200 where tens of millions of people had to wait for a check and some were still waiting. So as a country, we need to have an ability to direct deposit to every citizen, right? Because if and when this happens again, that problem needs to be cured in advance. But I digress. But what I was proposing is a debit card where effectively $1,000 every 2 weeks for 2 months, and you have to spend it in 10 days. Doesn't matter what you spend it on, but you have to spend it. We'll tell retailers you can't get cash back when someone uses this debit card. And then let them go out there and spend where they may. If it's rent, if it's food, whatever.
I love it, man. We should call it the Cuban card. You'd be
Nah,
the
that's
most
okay.
popular man in the country because everyone would be like, "I just used my Cuban card like
It sounds like
on
a new
drinks."
poker game.
It does. I mean, it does a little bit. I had a similar idea. I don't know if this is complementary. One thing I'm deeply concerned about is that 30% of small businesses may close forever because of what you and I are describing. So I was trying to think about ways we could get more money into small businesses, and a time limitation on spending is one. But I thought there might be a way to actually say, like, look, this money can only be spent at a locally owned small business. Like, you can't spend it on Amazon and the gang.
Yeah, it's hard though, right? Because A, a lot of the businesses aren't open, and B, you got to let. It's hard to regulate what people spend on. As much as I'd like to see local businesses, again, it's the right idea, but once you start negotiating where it's spent, then all the politics come into play. So do you allow this or do you allow that? What if your community doesn't have this type of store or that type of store, right? What if it's only a big national chain in your small town in Texas? So again, I think if you encourage people to spend locally, a lot of people will recognize that now's the time to do it. But if you require them to spend locally, you get into all the political ramifications, and then that just delays it. And speed is the variable we have to solve for first.
I'm with you. Time is of the essence. One of the reasons why I'm still convinced that the local spending can work is that there have been some college towns, to your point, that actually have like Ithaca bucks or like whatever the heck it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
and it's only good at like
And
those small
there's nothing
businesses.
that says you can't have local programs that you make it available to support, right? So whether it's Bloomington, Indiana bucks or Ithaca bucks or whatever it may be, Georgetown bucks, saying, yes, we will, you can't get cash back, but we encourage you to buy your local barter currency, right? Whatever it may be. And maybe that currency gives you a multiplier effect, right? We'll give you 105% of your stimulus because these are only available to spend locally. I'm all for that. That's a great idea.
So this is money in people's hands and consumer demand. And one thing that you said we should consider, which I agree with, is just jobs. Like anything we can do to create jobs out there in the marketplace. And so you've identified at least a few needs that we have that everyone can see. Hundreds of thousands of contact tracers and people to work at, identifying what's going on with COVID-19. I would definitely put infrastructure in this category. One of the concerns I have is like, how quickly can we hire large numbers of people and train them, create a new bureaucracy if it's done through the government? Because like you said, speed is of the essence, but I agree with you wholeheartedly that we have to essentially do everything we can to drag more people into the workforce and solve some of the problems that we can see in front of us.
Yeah, because that's the key. When you do it for solving problems, I'm not saying dig a hole, fill a hole, right? That accomplishes nothing, but we have programs like AmeriCorps, right? There's 40% of the population I read either has a vulnerability to COVID or is in the elderly demographic, right? So there are 40% of the population that's going to need help in one manner or the other as we get through this. And there's organizations like AmeriCorps, which already have the infrastructure in place to hire people. The only issue is increasing their budgets to allow them to hire more. So that's for elderly in-home care and support care. And I think that's critically important because you saw what happened in New York, right? There was something that came out that said, boy, I'm Mr. Statistics today. I don't know why, but 60%.
It's because you're talking to Andrew Yang, the math guy. It's like I rub off on you, Mark.
Right? I love to geek out with math. And so of the people who had COVID in New York, 60% are people who were shut in at home, who need outsiders to come in and help them. They can't go out and do it for themselves. And so there's an immediate need that AmeriCorps could train that doesn't have to be a high skill job, just to have to be a high compassion job. And you can create across the country, you can create millions of those, and that's a productive job that enhances the economy and really provides support. Same with tracking and tracing. Right now, you're forcing local communities and states to find out what's happening and where. And when you limit it to states and there's no federal standards.
Yeah, the virus doesn't exactly adhere to state lines.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, what type of models do you use and what type of analytics do you use? And how do you compare those from one state to another? And how do you integrate them all? So you end up having these siloed vats of data that may not be compatible. The same problem we have with healthcare right now with insurance companies in states. And so having this on a federal basis allows us to singularize the data and also hire the data workers, the computer programmers, the analytical people, the healthcare people that can do the analysis of it, so we can track it nationally and potentially even globally. And so those are the types of jobs, and same with testing, right? Same type of issue. Those are millions of jobs when you add them up that are productive, that have a multiplier effect, that have, even if they're just transitional, they may not be permanent, at least give people some confidence that they'll be able to keep their job for a couple of years.